have a lot of unlearning to do, and we have a lot of education to do ourselves. We need to hire folks who are formerly incarcerated. We need to enroll them. We need to make sure that there's affordable housing in our communities. And so it's not just putting this onus of responsibility on folks like Edgar, Jared, and Brian, who are already straddled with a bunch of responsibilities. It's on us as well to make sure that we are creating environments and actually putting in the resources and infrastructure to make it as easy and as inviting as we possibly can for folks who are getting out and who want to continue higher ed.
Hello, and welcome to Student Affairs Now. I'm your host, Keith Edwards. Today, we're talking about incarcerated and formerly incarcerated students in higher education. We'll be discussing systems, experiences, and ways to better serve these students in our student affairs praxis. We have 5 guests with lots of knowledge and experience to share with us today. Student Affairs Now is the premier podcast and online learning community for thousands of us who work in, alongside, or adjacent to the field of higher education and student affairs. We release new episodes every week on Wednesdays. Find details about this episode or browse our archives at studentaffairsnow.com. Today's episode is sponsored by Anthology. Learn more about their innovative, data-driven platforms to build and foster your campus student engagement experience. Learn more by visiting anthology.com/engage. Today's episode is also sponsored by EverFi, the trusted partner for 1,500 colleges and universities. EverFi is the standard of care for student safety and well-being with the results to prove it. As I mentioned, I'm your host, Keith Edwards. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm a speaker, consultant, and coach. You can find out more about me at keithedwards.com. I'm broadcasting from Minneapolis, Minnesota, at the intersections of the ancestral homelands of the Dakota and Ojibwe peoples. Let's get to today's conversation. Today, we're talking about a topic that emerged from a previous podcast. Dr. Aaron Corbett, who's with us today, was previously on the podcast to discuss campus policing and student activism for Black lives. And in that conversation, she brought up the issues facing incarcerated and formerly incarcerated students. As a host team, we immediately thought the topic deserved its own episode, and I'm glad we're able to bring that episode to you today. Dr. Corbett is joined today by another scholar researcher on this topic, Dr. Erin Castro. We've got the Dr. Aaron C's covered. We're also joined by 3 folks with their own experiences of the carceral state, Jared Wall, Edgar Montero, and Brian Jordan. Thanks all of you for joining us and what you're going to bring us and what you're going to teach us today. We want to begin with some introductions. So just begin with telling us a little bit about you, and let's begin with Jared.
Yeah, hey, thank you, Keith. Great to be here and great to be here with everyone that's on here. My name is Jared Wall. I served 26 years in Indiana. I was incarcerated in 1989 when I was 17. And during that time, I had the opportunity, I earned a GED, associate, 2 bachelors, and a master's. Then I went on and I administrated or ran the college program as a prisoner for like 12 years. And so kind of had the opportunity to get double perspective as a student and administrating a program inside. And then I was released about 6 years ago. I started applying for PhD programs, and just my goal was to get out of prison and survive and make it, and go enter a PhD. And I kept getting denials. My alma mater, for whom I had earned all those degrees and ran the program inside, actually denied me even. But after 3 years, I got a second master's in the meantime. But I finally, after 3 years, got accepted by Tulane University down here in New Orleans, where I'm entering my 3rd year as a PhD student. I'm currently teaching research design in the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women. And just kind of some of my focuses are participatory action research, affordability of college and prison, and just including the voices of formerly and currently incarcerated individuals.
Awesome. Sounds like a life's experience and a life's passion and a life's work for you there. So thanks so much for being with us. Edgar, let's hear from you.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. My name is Edgar Montero. I served 16 years and 6 months at the Utah State Prison. I'm a former incarcerated student. I participated in several programs, including on-site college and correspondence courses as well. Majority of the time I spent in prison was dedicated to education and helping others inside prison to better themselves, whether helping them with their GED or helping them with English. By the way, English is my second language. I participated also in programs like UPEP, University of Utah Prison Education Program, which is a nonprofit, a non-credit bearing education program. And while I was there, I met a lot of great people, a lot of really good community who were really helpful in my growth and my education. I earned a bachelor's degree and an associate's degree while I was in prison. And I'm currently working on a master's degree right now.
Awesome. Wonderful. Thank you for being here, Edgar. Brian, let's hear from you.
Hello, my name is Brian Jordan, and before I begin, I just want to salute those two brothers for what they've accomplished, despite the obstacles of incarceration. It's very inspiring just to hear it. But my name is Brian Jordan. Most people call me Love. I was incarcerated for 16 years in the state of Connecticut. My conviction was overturned after 16 years, and I've only been released, I'll say about 7 weeks now, 8 weeks now. My journey through higher education in prison began with Dr. Aaron Corbett through her program, Second Chance Education Alliance, and later was accepted into Yale University through the YPI program. And I'm now in the process of enrolling in Yale University to work on my bachelor's degree. So that's my journey through there. My passion is to kind of make this more than just receiving education in prison, and how do you take that education that people are giving to inmates and it correlates and translates to when you get out to opportunities, which is the position I'm in now, is how do you take that education and actually use it once you get out of here.
Wonderful. Thank you for being with us, Brian. So glad you're here. And you already gave a shout out to our next guest, Dr. Aaron Corbett. Go ahead.
Yeah, good afternoon, morning, wherever folks are that might be listening to this. My name is Aaron Corbett. I run the Second Chance Educational Alliance program, and I'm also the program coordinator for the Quinnipiac University Prison Project. I do lots of other things, but for the purposes, I think, of this conversation, the best thing that I've ever done is come into contact with Mr. Jordan and engage in some of the most thrilling conversations about writing and syntax and grammar. Happy to be here.
Thank you. And the other Dr. Erin Dr. Erin Castro, go ahead and tell us a little bit more about you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Erin Castro, she, her, they pronouns. I am an associate professor at the University of Utah in the higher ed program. And I also direct our on-site prison ed project, which Edgar was one of our very first students in, gosh, long time ago. And I'll just say that I am, for context of this situation, really committed in terms of research regarding the colleges and universities' responsibility in serving those who have been and continue to be harmed by the carceral system. And so that's really where I think my research and advocacy work is going.
Wonderful. Well, thanks all of you for being here. I want to begin as I need to know some foundations and some basics, and I think many of our audience does. So Brian, we're going to start with you. What are some of the basics here? How should we be framing this issue? What's the language we should be using or not using? How would you like us to frame this conversation? And what would you like our audience to know who maybe are really unfamiliar with this whole realm?
Well, if the conversation is about higher education in prison, in the pros and and the troubles of it.
Mhm.
The way I have been speaking about it is, we can't contain the conversation to just educating people that are incarcerated for the sake of being smart or educated while being incarcerated. That to me, I mean, it serves a purpose for some, and it's great, but the conversation has to be framed is using education for reentry purposes for people when they get out. And how do we get universities, as the sister just was speaking before I spoke, how do we get universities to buy in to those educated students that they invested in, needing opportunities and social networks afforded to them upon their release? So that's like how I see this conversation. I don't hear enough about it. There's a lot of programs people speak about in prison, but as we know, most people will get out of prison, and those relationships are stopping from what I see. So that's kind of how I most of my comments will probably come in that frame, but that's how I frame it.
That's great. Well, and one of the questions we're going to get to later is about what can student affairs folks in colleges and universities to do. And you're already calling us to not just support folks while they're in prison, but how do you continue to provide that support, the networking, the connections, the education, the opportunities afterward. So thank you for that. Edgar, what would you like to add? What are some of the foundational things you would want folks to know from your experience, from your life, that you would want to frame the conversation?
I think one way to frame this conversation would definitely have to be in terms of equity. Equity as far as like the opportunities that are provided to incarcerated students, and not just like any education, right? Because most college programs in prison provide some kind of trade schools, teach you how to weld, how to do mechanic work, whatever, but they never talk about high quality education, in terms of becoming, a better human being, a better professional, and in those conversations, how would that be helpful for the incarcerated student? So I think that's one way to frame this conversation, is by talking about education as a means to improve people's lives and provide that opportunity for everyone, whether you're incarcerated or not. So,
so moving beyond just job training, but bigger
yes.
conversations. Thank you, Edgar. Jared, what would you like to share?
Yeah, I think we could just frame this in so many ways. First of all, Brian, you saluted us, brother. I salute you back. First of all, for just getting out, what you've done as well. So just wanted to take that pause and throw that right back at you. That's well learned. So everyone here, just feel grateful. Got me goosebumps thinking about it. So framing it though, so I think a couple things that are said, kind of like Brian said. I think when people graduate, or with the degree, we can't forget about them after that time. So if people are in and they have a 4-year degree, they get it. I don't feel like we can just abandon them, go on to the next crop. I feel like we have a higher call of social justice. What then? Well, there are history projects, there are think tanks, there are, participatory action research. There's a lot we can do to continue with it versus just throwing them back to a monotonous, gray, black and white existence when they've been living 4 years of new ideas, new thoughts, growth, living in Technicolor. Okay, I don't feel like we should abandon our current students. Second, we should not abandon, as Brian said, our students that are released mid-degree or at any point. Make that transition into graduate school. My alma mater, I earned an associate and 2 bachelors, ran their program for 13 years, denied me 3 years in a row. Ultimately, after the 3rd year, they told me, your case is just too highly publicized and too local. They should not have been allowed ever to be in prison and have those programs, in my opinion, if that was what they were going to do with students who were released. And I was summa cum laude. I mean, it was just, again, they were worried about someone raising public stink, let's say. The last point I want to make on this is I think people need to move beyond the arguments of worth. It's like, oh, wow, well, why should people in prison get a degree when my I have to pay for my kids. Well, I think you need to reverse that question. Why are you having to pay for your kids? Why are you, is this such a situation that you can't afford college and this is maybe not an option for you or your children? I think it needs to be looked at as the larger equity. As Edgar was saying, we need to be looking at, the free college discussions. We need to realize that this is a prison population has been so socially excluded throughout their lives and on so many different levels. And this is the time we can get some social inclusion and actually help their situation, help that transformation, help provide them with credentials and opportunities when they're released. And, this is what we need to be doing. This is social justice, but also ask the larger picture. Yeah, why aren't people out here getting an opportunity as well?
I love that reframe. Thank you, Jared.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Aaron Corbett, what would you like to your student affairs colleagues to know? What's the sort of foundation we should build on here?
I think the foundation that we should build upon is exactly what Jared, Brian, and Edgar have mentioned. I have literally nothing to add. They have covered every base.
All right. And she's muted off to Dr. Erin Castro. She threatened that she would just turn it over to them. She meant it. All right, go ahead.
I think what I'll add here is that I love, and, the very first time I met you, Jared, and heard this story, it's just infuriating. It's absolutely infuriating that an institution would do that. And I think partly what I would just encourage my student affairs colleagues and anybody who's kind of working in higher education is that, part of what we are advocating for is that we see incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people as worthy of investment. And while that might not seem radical, the practices on college campuses right now, we know that 3 out of 4 institutions require criminal history disclosure across all institutional types. That is a huge barrier for people who want to access higher education. And there's no empirical evidence to support that those questions do what people think they do. And so I think the only thing I would add on this framing is that while, much of the emphasis has been on folks who have been directly impacted to make sure they're ready when they come out, I think we have a lot of education to do on the outside. For folks who have never been into prison, we have a lot of unlearning to do, and we have a lot of education to do ourselves. We need to hire folks who are formerly incarcerated. We need to enroll them. We need to make sure that there's affordable housing in our communities. And so it's not just putting this onus of responsibility on folks like Edgar, Jared, and Brian, who are already straddled with a bunch of responsibilities. It's on us as well to make sure that we are creating environments and actually putting in the resources and infrastructure to make it as easy and as inviting as we possibly can for folks who are getting out and who want to continue higher ed.
Mm-hmm. I love this framing of the unlearning the rest of us need to do and unpacking some of those things that we learn all along the way and get internalized. And also, what do we have to learn from folks who have spent time in jail, in prison, the life experiences, is we're already learning so much from the 3 folks who are here today. They're not just, they have something to add to the class conversations. They have something to add to the student experience. They have something to add to all of that. Thanks to each of you. I want to move on to myths, and then we're going to talk about strengths. And maybe we've already begun tapping into that. What are some of the myths? Jared, we're going to start with you. What myths do you think need to be dispelled for our audience?
Yeah, we have a long list, but one that I'm working on is, living in prison isn't free. Okay, so we talk about a cost of attendance issue on the streets with university, with higher ed studies. So cost of attendance is, not only tuition, we're dealing with books, we're dealing with room and board, we're dealing transportation. Well, it might seem odd to talk about cost of attendance inside when, tuition's free, room and board's free. However, in mass incarceration, they started doing cost sharing, cost shifting. Basically what it came down to is they started trying to foist some of the responsibility of daily living costs upon prisoners. And so a lot of times the student wage is a lower wage than working wage. And so people in this situation, it's like, wow, they, may not be able to afford to be a student because the wage is the lowest, and they can go work in an industry and make more. And yeah, we can say that, oh wow, well, hey, they need to get skin in the game and make the sacrifice, and we want those motivated students to go. No, we want everyone to be there. We want the people who aren't sure if they can make it or if they can make that sacrifice to go there. And then we're dealing with an equity issue too, that some can afford to do this and some can't. Some have people who are helping them, okay, and some don't. And we need everyone to have that equal opportunity, because if we're ever going to get any equity, this is the basically base place that has to happen. And to have something like cost of attendance or affordability, people just can't afford to live on a student wage. This needs to be taken care of, or we need to address this. And, particularly as we get, have the Pell Grants going to be reinstituted in 2023. So we're going to have programs proliferate throughout the whole nation. And, why are we going to recreate this problem? Why are we going to perpetuate this problem, start new programs that aren't addressing this? And then now we're going to have the same problem we have to fix later. So one of the principles is, why create something, that we have to amend later? So we need to do it the right way. We need to be aware of this. We have been just so happy to have any seats in a classroom that we haven't asked who's getting in them. Now we're going to get more seats, and we need to be asking who's getting in them, but also who is not getting in them.
Yeah. Thank you. Edgar, what myths would you like to dispel?
Well, I think one of the myths that I would like to dispel is this idea that incarcerated students are getting Pell Grants. Because there's a lot of people who would argue that, why are we offering free education for incarcerated folks when my child does not get the benefit of those, right? And part of the Pell Grant problem or issue was, I think that they stopped giving it to incarcerated folks, for a long time, since I believe the amendment made in 1994. So my experience in prison, during my 16 years in prison, I've never met anyone who received Pell Grants. So maybe in the past they had, prior to 1994, but after 1994, I don't think nobody has ever received those Pell Grants. So I think that currently there isn't any Pell Grants being offered. I think there's been talks about that. I'm of course I'm speaking out of my field. I don't have any sort of knowledge on this matter right now, but I can say though that in my experience in prison, there was no access to Pell Grants. Also, I think I want to add that, one of the benefits of Pell Grants, and I think the way they run it is through a financial, it's like an incentives. It's kind of like it's at their discretion to give it to whoever they want to give it to. So it's not that they choose to give it to incarcerated students or not, but it is that they give it to whoever they want, So that's one of these spells I wanted to put out there, is the fact that, incarcerated students, from my knowledge, are not currently receiving any Pell Grants.
Great, thank you. Brian, what myths would you want to dispel?
Well, it's two for me, and the first one is I don't know about where you are, but down this way, there's a myth that if you're in prison, you just can easily receive a free college education, and that is a myth. There's very limited seats. They're highly competitive. You're thoroughly vetted, and it's rigorous, and you have to invest a lot of time. But the seats are very limited, so it's not like you just go to jail and you could get a free, quote unquote, education. The second is that a degree, although good and can open some social networks for you and can change your life, it's something that I'm hoping will happen to me. It's not a solve to all the problems and the trauma that faces somebody before incarceration and has suffered a long-term incarceration. Like some of these brothers that's speaking now, they went through a traumatic period of their life. A college degree does not solve that. And it is sold as such sometimes and spoken about as at times. So those are the two myths that I would want to dispel.
Thank you. Dr. Castro, would you like to add?
I think the only thing I would add is that, as we think about Pell Grants becoming more widely available, we know that a large percentage of people in prison will remain ineligible for Pell Grants. And so, I just caution, I think there's a lot of thoughtful people in the field right now saying, wait a second, let's not put all our eggs in this basket, because we now know that for all sorts of reasons, and primarily prior loan default, the Pell Grant isn't going to be the saving grace that's going to kind of help us rebuild pre-1994 college and prison, nor should it be. We need institutional commitment. We need institutional infrastructure. We need alternative ways, including state funding of scholarships, so that when folks get out, their Pell Grant isn't exhausted, that they can actually use their Pell Grant, once they're out. And so I would just say, for anybody who's thinking like, oh, check, Pell Grants are coming, it's a much more complicated story, and one that we need to learn from our history. And there's a reason that all the programs disappeared in 1994. If you pull Pell Grants away, a whole field shouldn't disappear. And so we've got to build it differently this time.
Mm-hmm. Great. Dr. Corbett, I'm sure there's some myths that you hear that they haven't touched on. Let's get you in here. What's some myths?
I don't
that you'd
know
like to
whatever
dispel?
you might mean. One, I think, is it is perhaps not so much a myth as it is a need to shift the conversation and the narrative. We need to get it away from the recidivism paradigm, which has been the dominant research paradigm for this entire field. It is always seeming to boil down to what is this program's impact on recidivism, which is trash and garbage, because higher ed programs, you can certainly look at correlations, but we know that correlation is not causation. And we also know that the laws in each state, the laws that are federal, can impact people who are formerly incarcerated in ways that have literally nothing to do with the higher ed and prison program that they were participating in. A perfect example is that there was a student of mine who had gotten released and had started a juice bar. He was active in his local NAACP chapter. Much like I am doing with Brian, I would drag him onto panels to talk about his experience and his time with his juice bar. And he was reincarcerated because the real reason was that his parole officer didn't know how to spell his name. That is literally why he got reincarcerated. But they labeled it absconding and said that he was intentionally obscuring where he was when he was actually in newspapers, on flyers. And as Chandra Bazelko wrote, and she's formerly incarcerated and is a phenomenal journalist, she said it was easier to find Rennell than it was to lose him. And so when we talk about recidivism and kind of pin all of the hopes of higher ed and prison on this problematic non-higher ed metric, you exclude and negate all of the different systemic pieces that are actually impacting our students once they are released. So that's what I'll add.
Yeah, thank you. For those of you not watching this and just listening, you were talking about the issues of recidivism, getting lots of love and applause and head nods from our panel. And then as you were sharing that example, a lot of anger and frustration, and really hard for folks to hear that. So, let's go to, we talked about some myths. I'd love to hear what are strengths. I don't want to just approach this from a deficit-based model, but what are the strengths and the contributions you see students who have experience with the Coastal State bringing to higher education? What's the benefit, not just to them, but to the rest of us? Brian, what are you seeing as some of the strengths and contributions?
Well, I will speak personally, and from what I know personally from the students in the classrooms that I've been in. And I would say that the biggest strength is that it's a transformation, regardless of the degree, regardless of the accolades you get. Education transforms your mind, It allows you to see things differently, allows you to speak things differently, allows you to articulate, which decreases your aggression because you're able to tell people what's wrong. You're able to feel heard. You're able to problem solve. And that is the biggest problem that faces a lot of people before they was incarcerated and when they be released. So the degree is great, but the transformation that I seen in people that sat with Dr. Corbett and through the other programs that I've been in with Yale or whether they were taking other college programs, just the transformation of their selves from when I seen them when they came to prison until a year into those programs, one of the biggest things I seen that higher education had to offer in a prison setting. And it's a beautiful process. So that for me, personally speaking, from my involvement in it, that's one thing that I mean, it helped me tremendously in that.
And that transformation of the individual helps how they interact with everyone around them.
And it's contagious.
Right. Yeah. What a wonderful point. Edgar, go ahead. What's the strength or contribution you see?
Well, I think I agree with Brian. I think education empower you to be a better individual, and it is contagious. But I would also add that one of the strengths that we bring is our experience. We came from rock bottom, and now we're building up our new lives from the new foundation of education. And I think people can see our experience and they can draw from that they can do better, right? Like if we're able to do it while in prison, and we were in this kind of rock bottom place, how is it that we were able to achieve what we achieved, right? It's possible that that we can do this with, through education, and I think that is one of the strengths, is being able to bring a different experience. And I can't even imagine what incarcerated student will look in a real classroom, right, and on campus. All the experience that he brings into that classroom, a whole different perspective, a whole different culture. We were sort of introduced to a culture in prison that we did not prefer to be in, but we were able to mold into that culture, and we bring that experience into our peers, whether it's on campus once we are out on the streets, or whether it's still in our communities or even our families. So I think that we bring a very unique experience to our communities, for sure.
Well, and you all are experts on many of the things we're talking about in these courses in the classrooms, whether it's equity or poverty or the criminal justice system or government intervention, right? Rather than theorizing about this, you all have experienced it, know from a firsthand perspective. Jared, what would you like to add about the strengths and contributions?
It's just, I can reiterate everything that's been said, but I mean, it's just the lived experience is so important. But I think, first of all, I think people inside learn differently, maybe than outside, in this sense that I think for so many of us, it means so many things. Again, we're living in such an environment of deprivation, okay, that you have now this opportunity, these ideas. And then secondly, there's a hunger. I'm teaching inside, I'm teaching outside. There's a hunger that the inside students have that I don't see outside. Okay. And I think part of this hunger they're telling me is just, some of them talk about, proving themselves. And I'm like, you don't need to prove it to me. You're a great student, but it's they're proving to themselves. They're proving to the whole world. I think that they are capable, habile, is capable, which is rehabilitation, but they're just that they're intelligent, that they're learners, that they can do this. And I think, they feel that castigation, they feel that stigma, and this is a chance to prove that. But I think another way they're learning, and this was true for me, is every course wasn't it wasn't the banking model. It wasn't facts that I'm storing away. Instead, each class, each idea, each theory became a lens through which to look at my past and try to understand, things that happened to me that I didn't understand growing up, things that were going on with my environment now. Oh, there's some good things. There's some very toxic things. And then also a lens through which to critique my own culture I grew up in, and then the larger society. So I don't know if everybody else uses education like that. Lastly, then I just want to say that, coming out, for an individual who has gone through such a non-traditional path to end up in a traditional setting where they're actually sitting in a chair before admissions committee, I think they're looking at the deficit. They're looking there at the, oh, wow, this criminal legal history, when in fact they should be look at all the barriers, all the obstacles that this individual has come through and gone through. Who else has gone through the gauntlets that this individual has? You know, the determination it takes, the overcoming, the resilience, etc. I could go on, but I think that is just not looked at. And to me, it's just hard for me to even believe that people don't recognize that.
Right. Well, and you're making me think about how many in K-12 and higher ed, how many students feel like this is something I have to do. And I don't want to do it, but I have to go to class. I have to write this paper. I have to read this book. I have to do this assignment. And you're talking about this different attitude of I get to, and I'm excited to do this, but also applying it, not theoretically to other people, but to their own lives. Such a rich contribution. Again, Dr. Corbett, what other strengths and contributions have you seen?
So I think that having currently and formerly incarcerated students at the table at the beginning of like every planning something, every organizing something is absolutely critical. And the example that I'll use is actually with Jared. He and I co-wrote an article that should be coming out soon this year, I guess, in the after times. And one of the things that Jared and I have talked about over the years is what he was talking about earlier, this idea of affordability, cost of attendance, and what does that mean and look like across facilities and across student experiences. And he presented these data to me in a way where I was like, I literally never would have thought about that, because I, as woke and liberal and far left as I think I am, very much fell into this is, free for someone who's incarcerated. When, if you're making the choice between being a student and being employed, that's not free. When you are making the choice between, I have to keep this facility job because that's how I stock my commissary, that's not free. And so having Jared as a thought partner was absolutely critical to my better understanding what some students might be going through as we are running our programs. I think the other piece that's really important to note, there was a conference last week or maybe 2 weeks ago now, I don't know time anymore, the Rise Up conference, which was organized by formerly incarcerated people. The speakers were predominantly formerly incarcerated, if not all formerly incarcerated. Sessions were led by formerly incarcerated folks. And it was phenomenal. It was better than any conference I have been to where these conversations are happening, but that are not organized by the people directly impacted in the system. And that is because the people who are directly impacted know the topics that need to be addressed. They know the conversations that need to happen, and they know that there are hard conversations that need to happen, and they are not afraid of having those conversations. I think it is, incumbent upon us, as Dr. Castro was saying, it's incumbent upon the universities, the institutions, to get their lives together, right? Because when we think about, who was at the Rise Up conference, where were all of those big programs that talk about, embracing the voice of the formerly incarcerated student, but they're not showing up to the formerly incarcerated conference. And so we have to really ask ourselves these difficult questions that force us to confront our own hypocrisy in a lot of ways that we have not been forced to encounter it before. We wouldn't have that without the input of people like Edgar, people like Brian, people like Jared.
Awesome. Well, let's move to one of our last questions. This is Student Affairs Now. Our audience are student affairs professionals, broadly defined. Some in admissions, as we're already challenging and critiquing. Some are hiring folks, supporting students. How could student affairs professionals best support? And I already have two that folks have shared. One is supporting folks beyond degree completion, as we talked about with jobs, connections, networks, and then also not viewing the degree as just job training, but also training for life and to be a better human, as Edgar pointed out and others chimed in on. Let's stick with you, Dr. Aaron Corbett. What would you like to suggest for student affairs professionals, how can they best support incarcerated students and formerly incarcerated students?
So I think the first step is for student affairs people to get involved in higher ed and prison programs. Step one, so while residential life may look different inside of a correctional facility, there are still very unique residential concerns that incarcerated students have when they are participating in these college programs. When we think of things like access for disabled students, when we think of, a lot of the Title IX issues, when we think of just any number of things that student affairs professionals deal with on free world campuses, we also have to understand and figure out how those student affairs professionals can do the same kinds of counseling, advice, workshop sessions with students who are incarcerated and tailor those sessions for the unique needs of incarcerated students. Right now, for the most part, and if I'm wrong, Dr. Castro will surely let me know, there's no robust student affairs anything in any program. And that includes my own, right? So this isn't like me pointing fingers. This is me, it is me pointing fingers, but I'm also pointing the fingers at myself, where we don't have the capacity, because it's just me, it's Second Chance. But other programs that do potentially have the capacity to engage their student affairs employees to also then engage with incarcerated students, I think that that's really the first step.
Awesome. Jared, would you have suggestions for student affairs professionals?
Oh, absolutely. I think so far, we have the box, the felon box that you check, yes, and we're viewing it, and it becomes liability, it becomes risk analysis, it becomes all these things for exclusion, it becomes all these things for denying. Instead, it should be a focus for affirmative action. So someone checks that box and they're like, I feel like the university should be at that point and realize, oh, we have a social justice mission now. How can we support this individual? How can we help this individual? What areas of wraparound services can we provide within and even outside of the university is what they should be doing. I mean, take Tulane University, where I go. New Orleans is the carceral center of the world during mass incarceration. If any university should have a social justice mission to help formerly incarcerated, it should be the universities here in New Orleans, to be active, like Aaron Corbett was saying there, to, be involved in the prison. They have a prison program in the women's prison. They should, like you say, have those officers there help that transition. And then even maybe with their scholarships, or just be bringing people in and hooking them up with the Pell Grants, or, the different grants that they can to try to get them. And lastly, I think we have the examples like the underground scholars in California, but we have communities of formerly incarcerated scholars. So people don't feel alone out here on a university that pretty privileged, Tulane, let's say, and realize that your life isn't anything like most people's lives out here. Have a community of people like you, have a community of people who've gone through some of the barriers and understand you, and you don't feel that sense of stigma or kind of, being an outcast too. So I think just having, all that.
all that. Thank you. That is awesome, Jared. Brian, any suggestions from you for student affairs professionals about how they can support folks?
I think with the last two were pretty inclusive to whatever I would say. I wouldn't have much to add. I think how we view people that are incarcerated, just saying that term is loaded and it's problematic because it separates you. You already are looking at that student differently by the labels. I'm not sure what formerly incarcerated means anymore. I don't feel like I still feel incarcerated. I still face some of the same problems as I have and as people incarcerated face. It's just I'm in a bigger space with a little bit more mobility, but I still feel very much incarcerated at times. But I think it's how we look at the student. We need to ask ourselves, or they need to ask themselves, are we treating them as students, or are we treating them as incarcerated people? If we treat the incarcerated as students, and what the word means, I think a lot of the problems will solve themselves. But at times we don't. We treat them like they're incarcerated, when really we should treat them as students.
That's such a powerful point, Brian. I really appreciate you bringing that in and treating them not just as students, but as human beings. So
Yeah.
important. Thank you. Dr. Erin Castro, thoughts for your student affairs colleagues? Challenges, nudges?
So many thoughts. I would first just love to say that everything that everyone's said, I'll echo Dr. Corbett's invitation here. If you have a prison program at your university or adjacent, within driving distance, it's doable for you, I strongly encourage folks to reach out. Most of us always need help. So these are programs that are chronically underfunded. And a lot of the help that we need, is in prison, but we have a number of volunteers who don't go into the prison for all sorts of reasons, and you can help on campus, you can help in other ways. And so I would say that's the first. I also think there's a lot being written in this area right now. So there's ways for folks to educate themselves. We are producing scholarship and information on the intersection of, reentry, incarceration, higher ed access, equity. And so if we'll share some links with you, Keith, and some resources, but folks, a lot of this information is freely accessible. I know a number of us who maybe publish in outlets that aren't will happily share this information. So please feel free to reach out to me. And then I think the other thing I would challenge my student affairs friends to do is to look at whether or not their institution, to Jared's point, requires criminal history disclosure as part of the admissions process. And if it does, start asking some questions as to why. And this can actually be extended to any part of service that you're involved in. If you're on a scholarship committee that screens for these questions, ask somebody why. Oftentimes we just perpetuate some of these norms, and really it just takes someone to say, well, wait a second, why would we exclude someone with that history? And so I think that could be another thing that you do. And, just know that if you find that your institution does ask this question, there are some phenomenal things happening with grassroots student organizing across the globe, across this country, where you can not have to reinvent the wheel here. You can work with other student groups, you can work with other staff groups. And I would say that those are all things that folks can do right now to kind of start educating themselves about how a broader structure can be more inclusive.
Thank you. And your fellow Dr. Aaron wants you to plug JHEP, and I don't know what that is.
So that would be the Journal of Higher Education in Prison, of which Dr. Erin Castro is one of the executive editors. And so the first issue just came out, like a couple weeks ago. One of Brian's former classmates is published in there. And so it is a great resource.
Thank you. And stay tuned for Dr. Corbett's edited volume that a number of us are going to be writing chapters in very soon. And I know Edgar and I are working on a draft right now that's due like in a week. So lots of opportunities for folks to read pieces that are written by folks directly impacted and folks directly on the ground, right? So we're straddling higher ed, we're straddling, prisons. It's a nice time if you're wanting to get into understanding this, to be able to kind of pull up a lot of this scholarship for free online right now.
Thank you so much. Thank you for mentioning that. Thank you for doing that work. Thank you for sharing that and making that available. Well, we're just about out of time, and this is called Student Affairs Now. So we want to give, we end every episode asking our guests, what is it that you're thinking about, troubling, or pondering now? It might be something that is just been on your mind at this moment in the world, something that's going on with you, or just at the end of this conversation, what's really with you? So just real quick, what's sort of on your mind now? And then if folks can connect with you, where can they connect with you? Maybe Twitter, email, LinkedIn, something like that. Erin Castro, let's begin with you. What are you pondering now?
Oh my gosh. I'm really pondering as to whether or not everyone on this call is going to be at NCHEP, the National Conference of Higher Ed and Prison in Denver. And if so, if we can find ourselves a little time to just grab a beverage and hang out, because It's lovely having all of you in one space. So I'll make that plug for folks who are interested. We have a national conference this year. It's going to be held in Denver. There are lots of scholarships to attend. So, out-of-pocket costs tend to be really small. And if you have a problem paying, there's also ways to get subsidies for that.
Awesome. Thank you. Brian, what's on your mind now? What's on your heart now?
Sure you hear that. Sorry.
Yeah, as the motorcycles fly by. Go ahead. What's on your mind and heart now?
Well, hope is on my mind now, and I'm looking towards the future, and education is a part of my hope. They are married, they're tethered together, and remembering those that are incarcerated, that they're, like you said, that they're human beings, and helping that humanity stay alive. I think is a job of everybody that cares about higher education in prison. Is how do we keep the humanity of those that are losing it by the second. So that's constantly on my mind. It has been for a long time because I've seen it. I know the effects of it, and I am it in many ways. So that's kind of what I have to leave people with.
I love that muscular hope in maintaining our own humanity and helping others and seeing the humanity in others. Thank you. Jared, what's with you now?
I mean, I could go into the things I'm working on, like, the wages versus student pay, or the participatory action research I'm doing with, by the First Step teaching research design with at the women's prison. But I think what's hitting me at this very moment is the fact that, we have a 68% recidivism rate, and Department of Justice, they define it as failure, which I think is hilarious, but they never ask whose failure. Okay, if I had a business selling fire extinguishers and they failed 68% of the time, am I going to blame the individual user 68% of the time? Or am I got to step back and say, oh, there's something wrong with my processes that, they're failing 68% of the time. So I think we just have to start stepping back, looking at the larger picture, respect for the individuals. Look, we know education is one of the things that reduce it, but moving beyond that, we have to reframe our whole criminal justice system. We have to reframe, what's happening? Why are people getting in here? Why is it more this certain demographic versus others? How are we, why are people being labeled now for life and facing 44,000 collateral consequences state and nationally for life? And the last point is just a lot of these spaces of even inclusivity are still getting people involved that are formerly incarcerated with whom they are comfortable. So we talk about the nonnies being the non-violent offenders, the non-sexual offenders, all these, non-anything that, I'm uncomfortable with. Where, the drug offenders is always going to be what people bring in. And I think we have to start challenging the narratives and looking at harder questions, violence in our country, violent crimes, how do you reintegrate? How do we prevent? There's just a lot of issues that we have to start looking much broader at. And it's time we have to do it. We absolutely have to do it.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. Edgar, what's with you now?
Well, one of the things that I've been pondering on since I've got out of prison was a lot of the lifer folks, people who are doing life without parole, right? Like a lot of them are denied access to education for that fact, right? Because they see most facilities, administrators will see education as a means to, better improve the recidivism rate, and they don't look at education as a means to improve people's lives and things like that, right? So I think a lot about those folks who are doing life without parole, who do not get access to education because of that. And I have a lot of friends who I left behind who are facing that dilemma, and I remember having conversations with them about it. And, I just hope that these conversations sort of helps our communities to rethink those issues of education in prison, and not look at education in terms of how does it reduce recidivism, but how can education help improve someone's lives, whether they're in or out of prison.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Aaron Corbett, what's with you now?
So My current passion and interest and focal point is this question and issue of accountability and who is ultimately held accountable for program quality, for the level of partnership between DOCs and higher ed institutions. I think we're entering a phase where there is just an increased level of necessary collaboration that's happening between these two systems, higher ed and corrections. And there are lots of conversations about how to hold higher ed institutions accountable, and they are all very legitimate, but there are almost no conversations about how to hold DOCs accountable. I hold myself accountable to many things. I mess up a lot, and Brian has seen many of those mess ups and has been far more gracious with me than I have ever deserved. And so when I think about and talk about accountability, it's really in the vein of ensuring that students are having access to the highest quality programs that it is possible to put on. And sometimes that means that we have to hold DOCs accountable for not extending the level of partnership that's necessary, for not wanting to understand the different ways that higher ed institutions need to make things work, to maintain their accreditation, to maintain their Title IV status, to maintain, X, Y, and Z. And so the sooner we can get to those conversations, and also looping in, again, student affairs professionals to help have those conversations, I think we can really start to see some movement forward with programs that are really, really top tier, high quality. I don't think we will see the most of that or see it in its truest form until those conversations of accountability are happening and student affairs people are more involved in them.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. This has just been a terrific conversation. I've learned so much, and I really appreciate each of you for the perspectives, the insight, the wisdom, the knowledge, and the brilliance that you've all brought. I'm just incredibly grateful for this conversation. I want to wrap up and conclude. Thanks to our sponsors today on this episode, Anthology and EverFi. This episode is sponsored by Anthology. Transform your student experience and advance co-curricular learning with Anthology Engage. With this technology platform, you're able to easily manage student organizations, efficiently plan events, and truly understand student involvement to continuously improve your engagement efforts at your institution. Learn more by visiting anthology.com/engage. For over 20 years, EverFi has been the trusted partner for 1,500 colleges and universities with 9 efficacy studies behind their courses. You'll have confidence that you're using their standard of care for student safety and well-being with the results to prove it. Transform the future of your institution and the community you serve. Learn more at everfi.com/studentaffairsnow. Huge shout out to Nat Ambrosi, the production assistant who makes all of us look and sound good, all the work behind the scenes. If you're listening today and not already receiving our weekly newsletter, please visit our website at studentaffairsnow.com, scroll to the bottom of the homepage and add your email to our MailChimp list and check out the archives. I'm Keith Edwards. Thanks again to our fabulous guests and all you've brought today. So appreciative. And to everything who's watching and listening, make it a great week. Thank you all.